So anyway, the Mount Pleasant Association is a community organisation representing the neighbourhood. For over 2 years we've embraced the spirit of localism, and we're now in the process of developing a neighbourhood plan for the area. Indeed, as the last speaker said, we recently won funding from the GLA's own Community Right to Build programme for this purpose. So we're here as spokespersons for the large and diverse community surrounding this potentially fantastic site. The MPA has come to represent over 20 local groups with hundreds of people, many of whom are here today, we're pleased to say. The full list can be seen on the following PowerPoint and indeed the MPA website. The long list represents many Londoners from a huge variety of backgrounds. We share with everybody a love for this historic district, and we believe that development is necessary, of course, but that it should both serve the needs of all and leave a positive civil legacy to London. Indeed, we believe that way it will also serve best the Royal Mail's shareholders and UK taxpayers who are currently being shortchanged by this scheme. Thank you very much. I think Mike is next.
Good morning. My name is Mike Franks. I'm the chair of the Mount Pleasant Association. I'm an architect planner. I've lived in the area for 40 years, and I founded the Clerkenwell Workshops in 1975. Mr. Mayor, please understand, we are not a protest movement. We are a legally constituted social enterprise and a registered charity, preparing an alternative scheme for the out-of-date fortress you have in front of you. Grant-aided by your own people, we have given ourselves 6 months to produce our neighbourhood plan and frame our proposals to fit them. We ask that you also give us this time. What began as a gut instinct by local people has matured into a certain knowledge that the proposals in front of you are misconceived. We know this because we have tested them professionally and set them against an alternative design that simply outperforms them. We're in for the long haul. We will remain active throughout the disruptive construction years. We may even build some housing and workspace. As stakeholders, we make full use of what the 2011 Localism Act has to offer. Our new offices in on Royal Mail's northern flank will be operational soon, and we will foster all manner of community initiatives. Royal Mail cannot continue to ignore us, neither should they try to fool us. The ridiculous 12% affordable offer is now double. What a predictable surprise. And if we can see through these tactics, we hope you can. So what went wrong? Something most definitely did, and probably at a very early stage. Somehow, Royal Mail have ended up with a weak and underachieving master plan that has become yesterday's news. This forest of slabs and towers turns its back on its neighbours, and in its present form can never become a real neighbourhood. It is a scheme with little, if any, local awareness, designed around a totally misconceived concept. It fails to realise its financial and social potential, and no one will touch it as it stands. It already has a bad press, and any future investor is bound to redesign it. You called it in to speed it up, and approval at this stage will probably produce much more delay. We have shown that there are valid alternatives to the high-rise development with far better pedestrian desire lines and higher land values. How ironic that Royal Mail Group have paid for much of the research behind the planning brief, and then they chose to ignore it when it suited them. And finally, they adopted an ill-conceived indicative layout, excuse me, despite the warnings that it was merely one of many options. Saddled with this layout, the scheme was doomed from the start. I'm sorry about this. Surely your officers saw through the attempt to offload the costs of a massive new underground marshalling yard onto us. This 1.2-acre tin roof over this yard has been wrongly included in the density and viability calculations. It's a naughty bit of double counting, made almost comical by the landscape roof, misnamed the meadow, that no one is allowed even to walk on. Time moves on, but this scheme has not. We are told that these proposals are unalterable, so we have to assume that they intend to plough on, Royal Mail intend to plough on, regardless of the new housing that's going to happen in Clerkenwell Fire Station, TfL's cycles superhighway along Phoenix Place, proposal for a secondary school at Wren Street, redevelopment of Charles Simmons House, new housing proposals along Laystall's Court, and TfL's proposals for 2 Farringdon Road junctions. And we all thought that goes-alone master planning was discredited a long time ago. We have to think again. So, Mr Mayor, 2 years of tokenism, masquerading as public consultations, has not dulled our commitment. We know we have a valuable contribution to make, but we need time to develop our plans. The end result will do you credit. The present scheme will only tarnish your name. I now pass on to Judy Dainton.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, I'm Judy Dainton. I'm a pensioner. I live in Halethorpe Street, and I'm secretary of our local residents' association and member of the Mount Pleasant Association. I'm talking briefly about objections to the Camden site. Because the Camden site of this development is double the density of the Islington site, and these developers have put more of their housing on this site. It is absolutely disproportionate. The block plan contravenes the SDP, preventing decent connectivity or logical penetration through the site. It blights the views of the historic built environment that the local conservation area guidelines seek to protest. There are no decent streets through this monolithic housing block, just walkways. The concept isn't London. This whole area deserves a proper, sophisticated urban design, and this is certainly not it. It's a mess. The location of tall buildings has been determined by PTAL values rather than functionality or need, resulting in the profoundly insensitive proposals, such as a 15-storey tower, which will loom over local flats like Leicester Court and our local primary school, blocking out the last sliver of light to its entrance. We trust, Mr Mayor, you read the letters and watched the film messages the pupils of this school sent you last summer. If not, ask your officers, because they have seen them. Basically, these huge buildings proposed are all in the wrong places. They bear no sympathetic relationship to their existing neighbours, they just dominate. Provision of decent open space or public amenity is almost entirely absent on the Camden side of the site. This is bad enough, but made worse when considering the context that this is one of the most densely populated areas in the country. Holborn and Covent Garden Ward has the highest density of population in Camden, south of the Euston Road. Yet the Camden part of this site offers no proper open space, just some little courtyards, alleyways and a huge monolith of housing. It's not good enough. The housing provision is aimed at the commercial rental market, contravening the SPD, which advocates the creation of a stable, rooted and secure community. No doubt these flats will be let because of their location, but they'll be expensive, the housing proposed is mediocre, the rooms aren't very large, the finishing is average and the views are minimal. All in all, it's a poor, unimaginative showing and a slum for the future. No consideration.
You can't have it both ways.
No consideration has been given to the surroundings. The northeast corner of the site by the Holiday Inn is a treacherous traffic junction. The monolithic cliff face of the buildings now proposed create a grim chasm at the end of my street and sever Bloomsbury from Finsbury at the point where, ironically, the two communities were first connected by a bridge over the Fleet. With no checks and balances on the quantity or quality of Royal Mail's vans that will be hurtling around our neighbourhood, and they are increasing in volume, our community is further being sacrificed so the Royal Mail can intensify its operations in the heart of our city. Not good enough. There is more to say and no time. Our fundamental objection is that the proposed concept, design and detail too often contravene the guidelines which are laid out in the SPD, the local planning regulations and the London Plan. Yet your officers' report glosses over every transgression. Either we have planning laws and guidelines or we don't. I don't think. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll hand over to Ed Dennison.
Thank you, Judy. I'm Edward Dennison. I'm a local resident. I teach at the Bartlett School of Architecture at UCL. While one of the outstanding features of this process has been the absence of dialogue between the applicant and local stakeholders, another has been the volume of documentation and the contradiction between the planning guidelines on the one hand and the design and the assessment of that design on the other. In one word, it is doublespeak. And summarising my objections and highlighting this doublespeak, I'll concentrate on three key stages of the process: the supplementary planning document of 2012, the 5,000-page planning application of 2013, and your officer's report published last Friday. The SPD stated that heights should respect and balance the existing heights and scale of the surrounding area. The SPD, but in the proposal, 4 stories have become 6, 4 to 8 stories have become 9 to 12, and up to 10 stories have become 15. The GLA officers claim the scheme has broadly followed the guidance. They claim the proposed height, mass and bulk of the scheme relates well to the scale of the surrounding development and the site's topography. And while acknowledging that the 9 and 12-storey elements go beyond the guidance, we're assured this does not cause any harm and provides well-considered variety to the streetscape. Mr. Mayor, who is the judge of harm? Why do we have planning guidelines if the person responsible for enforcing them willfully permits their contravention? Local Conservation Area Guidelines demands that the new buildings should conform to the height, scale and proportion of existing buildings. The SPD cites one exception, the incongruously scaled Holiday Inn, but the Royal Mail's response is Block H, an even more massive building, which officers claim is well considered within its townscape setting, is not overscaled and would not detract from the character and appearance of neighbouring conservation areas. Mr. Mayor, let me make this clear. The Holiday Inn is the one building highlighted in the SPD as being incongruously scaled, yet it is accepted as the benchmark for even higher buildings. The same occurs with a 15-storey block opposite Christopher Hatton Primary School, which has appalled parents and teachers. Let's look at light loss. An acceptable loss is said to be 20%, yet rooms in Charles Simmons' house suffer losses of 28%, and that's going to be demolished and a bigger block is going in its place. Laysall Court, opposite the 15-storey block, will suffer losses of 45%. Yet the 61 paragraphs of the officer's report deals with this subject, and yet officers claim the proposed development would not result in a significant loss of sunlight to neighbouring properties. They acknowledge Charles Simmons' house exceeds the guidelines, but wave it through as being within flexible parameters. At Laysall Court, consultants admit the loss is very significant, but this fact is brushed aside as being adequate in the context of the location, especially, and this bit's almost comical, as it is understood that 4 of these windows serve bedrooms. The SPD advocates the reduction of carbon emissions, and both local authorities demand zero car ownership. The Royal Mail will increase vehicle movements from 2,000 to 3,000 vehicles a day. That's one vehicle every 28 seconds, 24/7. Bucking the trend of advanced cities everywhere, they also promote private car ownership by providing 119 car spaces. But the officer's report supports this claim. The scheme has an acceptable quantum of proposed car parking and will minimise carbon dioxide emissions. The city is choking. Mr. Mayor, you recently received a Clean Air Award from C40. Surely, as a champion of clean air, you cannot condone Royal Mail's disregard for the health and well-being of Londoners. The SPD stresses the importance of landscaping. Used imaginatively and creatively, it gives life to the scheme and can improve its edges and corners. Here is a view of the main public space, a windswept concrete precinct with potted shrubs filling the void between 9 to 12-storey blocks and named the Garden. Mr. Mayor, I know you're a classicist, but if you'll forgive me a pagan reference, we call this the summer solstice shot, showing the rare moment when sun will shine on this sorry garden. Officers take a different view on this and claim the scheme was well-defined public and private spaces, amenity and play spaces. The SPD repeatedly stresses the need for good connectivity and permeability. The proposal does not address desirable routes across the site, shown here in red, but instead encourages people to cross an impassable stretch of the busy Farringdon Road. It's badly planned and has poorly aligned connections that will encourage road accidents. But officers conclude the master planning principles are well considered, well integrated in the surrounding streets and movement network. This is untrue and is demonstrated by specially commissioned analysis by Space Syntax, which I'll share in a moment. Finally, on housing, the SPD stresses the provision of affordable housing, especially for families. Less than a quarter of the proposal will be affordable, and that is less than half of local authority targets. But the officers say the scheme would make significant contribution to housing delivery targets for the area. They also claim an internal rate of return of 20% is reasonable, and justify this by citing the Shell Centre plans. This is a simple equation. The higher the profit margin, the less affordable housing for Londoners. Mr Mayor, we have no objection to the Royal Mail seeking a healthy profit, but the Shell Centre case is in the High Court because of their demands for 20% IRR, and their development is so insensitive, UNESCO are threatening sanctions. Finally, the officer's report commends you approve this scheme. We're asking for a deferral. We want 6 months to exercise fully the enormous talent and knowledge we've mustered over 2 years. The GLA is supporting us through the Community Right to Build programme. We're embracing localism and developing a neighbourhood plan. We've attracted cross-party support in this Assembly, and we're in the pre-application discussions with both local authorities. This report was published this week by Legatum and Create Streets. It outlines our proposals and what can be achieved in this incredible site if the planning process is conducted properly by civic-minded, visionary professionals. Mount Pleasant Circus and Fleet Valley Gardens has responded to the insights and needs of the community. It's captured the imaginations of the public and won widespread approval among planners, architects and potential investors. It's based on conventional streets, not towers and blocks. It provides 8 to 16% more housing. The scheme is much more popular among Londoners. Space syntax analysis proves this scheme is 75% better connected to the surrounding streets than the Royal Mails, and this equates to greater value, between 17 and 34% more value over 40 years, which could pay for more social housing and offer millions to the British taxpayer, who still has a 30% stake in the Royal Mail. Mr Mayor, if for your sake, for the sake of our community, for Londoners, for the Royal Mail's shareholder and for the British taxpayer, you can prevent a tragedy and help create a legacy for London that will last. 6 months is nothing for a site that will survive centuries. With the current scheme, everyone's a loser. But by deferring today, you can make us all winners. We're confident that you'll do the right thing for Londoners. We've gone to unimaginable lengths to prove that our plans are better, not just for us and for London, but for the Royal Mail. By backing us, you're backing local communities, you're backing business, and you're backing a vision of a truly prosperous and civilised Britain in keeping with your own values and principles. 6 months will make all the difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have